So as you see, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And rather than having one person come up, bring in a message, bring in a word, we're going to do an interview. And we couldn't think of anyone better to host this interview space than Graeme Johnstone. Now, Graeme is a good friend of ours. He's been part of this church for 12 years. He's married to Antonia, and he works in recruitment and talent acquisition for an internet privacy company. But he also hosts this podcast called Table Talk. Now, a table talk connects current culture with Christianity, and I listen to it regularly. And some of my favourites that I've heard are Imposter Syndrome, How to Fix It, Has 60 Years of Barbie Made the World Better or Worse? How could God allow suffering? Are the robots coming for us? Evolution and Christianity, is there a conflict? Can you be too competitive? And are dogs a man's best friend? So I recommend this podcast to you, and I recommend Graeme to you. So would you give him a warm welcome as he joins us? Actually, Graeme, you've done one quite recently, haven't you?
Yeah. We did one, actually, just released it this week, all about the Rugby World Cup. I'm actually slightly distracted right now. Scotland are playing Tonga as we speak.
That's so kind of you to be here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all for the Lord, huh?
Yeah, so I might check the BBC Sports app occasionally throughout this, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
If we could get it on one of those screens, actually, that'd be
Yeah, we could do that.
No, but we actually had a really great guy on, a guy called Angus Kernahan. He was an Irish guy, and he's a professional rugby player, and he was sharing his faith in his career and some of his sort of some personal stuff that he had going on in his early life. So it was just brilliant. So it's been a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, amazing. Well, we're in your hands tonight.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And really great that I got the E on the end of my name this time. That was perfect. Thank you for that. So I guess, hello everyone. Nice to see you all. I haven't been to an evening service in literally years. This is really fun, actually. This is great. So, I guess tonight we really want to get some people up here who are going to share a little bit around how they think about sharing their faith, some of the things that they do practically around that. Emily, it would be really cool to get your view on why we want to talk about this and why it's important. But maybe we should get everyone up to start with. So please welcome up. We've got Lissa, we've got Chris. I think Jesse is in. Ethan, come on up. Ethan, if you jump in here, mate. Hey, Jess, you made it.
Chris is complaining about the sofa. He says he thought it'd be a bit softer.
Oh, really?
Don't be so high maintenance. Can you see Chris there? I'm not blocking him, am I?
Good to get feedback in the moment.
Good to get feedback.
So, Emily, sort of tee us up a little bit here. Why is this important to talk about? Why are we doing this evening?
Yeah, thanks, Graeme. I think when I read the Bible, what I get from why it's important to share our story is that it's actually something that Jesus commands. That's what I read from the scriptures. It says in Matthew's Gospel, right at the very end, chapter 28, when it talks about the Great Commission, it says, go and make disciples, go into the world. And that's not like a suggestion, but actually a command from Jesus. And I think the word go features something like 1,514 times in the Bible. So it feels like quite a strong word, which is about us going and being really active in sharing our faith. And I love reading through the Gospel of John, actually, where John the Baptist talks about sharing his testimony. We're sort of wanting to encourage us as a church. How do we share our story? How do we share our testimony? And John the Baptist talks about that in chapter 1. And he sort of says, then John gave this testimony. He says, I saw the Spirit come down from heaven as a dove and remain on him. I would not have known him except the one who sent me to baptize with water told me. And then you carry on reading in the scriptures in that chapter how Jesus called those first disciples. So John testifies, he shares his story. And then you've got Andrew encountering Jesus. And then what does Andrew do when he's encountered Jesus, he's experienced him, he follows him, and then he goes to his brother Simon Peter and he says, come and see. He just says, come and see. So there's this invitation all the time to, this is my experience, why don't you come and see? And essentially that's what the model of Alpha is very much. It's a come and see model. Later on, as you go down in those verses, so Philip found Nathanael. Philip encountered Jesus. And again, he says to him, come and see. So throughout Scripture, throughout the Gospels, we've got this model of sharing our testimony and saying to people, this is what I've experienced. There was that guy, wasn't there, who was blind. And people just sort of said, isn't the guy that healed you, isn't he a sinner? Do we trust him really? Where's he from? And he says, all I know is, once I was blind, but now I see. He was just saying, this is my story. I was once like this. I encountered Jesus, and now this is what's happened. This is how things have changed. And actually, when we read in Acts, we read how we're all called to be witnesses. It says the Holy Spirit was poured out in order that we might be witnesses for that primary purpose. And, when we talk about sharing our story, there might be some of us here, and me included, who think, gosh, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not like an evangelist with a capital E. The whole idea of sharing my faith makes me come out in a cold sweat. Please don't make me do it. I don't want a box on a street corner. But actually, we are maybe not all called to be evangelists, but we are all called to be witnesses. And a witness is literally somebody who says what they've seen, says what they've heard, and says what their experience is. And we can all do that. People might argue with points of theology or understanding around Christian faith, but they can't argue with your story. Your story, your experience, your encounter with Jesus is powerful, and that's what opens up hearts, leading the way to then trust God with his story that then changes people's lives. So I think that's my understanding.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's great. So that's the why covered. Perfect. It'd be great to get into some of the how and what. Maybe before we do that, it'd be great to sort of just introduce you all a little bit. So maybe if we start with you, Chris, just a quick, who are you? How long have you been coming to St. Mark's? What do you do? Something like that. Is that one working?
Hi, I'm Chris. I think I've been coming for about 18 months here. And I was a vicar in Reading, and I've moved to London, and I work for the Archbishop of Canterbury, which means that lots of people know I'm a Christian, because often, every Monday to Friday, I wear a clerical collar. So, when people aren't so some of us are when your friends find out you're Christian, they're like, oh, no, what, really? Whereas everyone knows, and so that's a thing with that, but also with friends who I've been praying for 25 years as well. What does it look like to witness to those people?
So they didn't think it was just a fashion statement. They were conscious that you were a Christian there.
It's not a fashion statement.
Very becoming. I like it. It's like a little necklace. Why not?
Got a fan in there? Okay, great. Lisa, how about you?
I'm Lissa. I've been coming to St. Mark's since 2019. I work in the city. I manage a building. I also have an active role in my work, Faith Network as well, and I am born and bred Wandsworth.
Fantastic. Yeah, we've got one in the middle there. Perfect. Is that one working? Great.
I'm Jessica. I work in music, and when Emily said you and Antonio have been coming for 12 years, I was like, oh, wait, because that means my number's wrong, because I think 8 years.
Really? I thought you might have been more than us. No?
That's
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I'm just going to stick with that for now.
Go with 8. That sounds right.
Go with that for now, yeah.
It is funny with those numbers, though, because mine was 8 for 4 years until Emily asked me yesterday, and I was like, oh, no, it's 12. So, yeah, 8. Good. Ethan?
I'm Ethan. So I've been at St. Mark's for just over a year now, and I've been working here. I work as the Sunday services and events coordinator, and I also work as a personal trainer. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, welcome all. Ethan, we might stick with you, actually, mate, if that's all right. Because I think, to start with, it would be really cool to understand, how do you think about sharing your faith? I mean, what does it look like for you? Is it sort of a 60-second, you've got it nailed on, you share the same thing every time, or do you kind of wing it every time, or what does that look like?
I do think it looks different every time. I think if there was a structure to it, the closest thing I have to structure is listen first. I think, because each person will be different on how you share. Some person might need the facts, who's more intellectual, and so I'll be like, oh, this is what I know about the facts about the Bible, but then someone might just need a bit of comforting. So it really is just listening and seeing where they're at, and so actually sharing is a process. Sometimes you don't have in the moment.
Got it. So. Okay, great. And have you got maybe a recent example of where you've shared your faith with someone and sort of how that went?
Yeah, I think most commonly and most recently it's been inside the gym, like working as a PT and going to the gym myself. I go to and fro to a whole bunch of different gyms in Wandsworth, Croydon, Victoria, all over London. And thankfully there's been like some young lads that have just somehow naturally just started talking to me. And then over time, got more comfortable about just sharing their life. And one of them is going to university, and he just came up to me, and he knows I'm a Christian. Like actually pretty much the whole gym knows I'm a Christian.
Sorry, how do they know that then?
I think it's when they ask you, what do you do? And it kind of comes up. I work for a church. I used to work as a youth pastor. And when I worked as a youth pastor, that stuck. All they heard was pastor. So when I walked into the gym, they would do the sign of the cross. And they were like, oh, the holy man's here. And I'd be
Amazing.
like, okay, cool.
What a cool nickname.
Yeah. But I was just like, you know what, you can just call me Ethan. But that's
Okay.
the young lads. I was talking to them. They would just say, hey, I know that you're a Christian. And some of them might say like, oh, I used to go to church and I'm just finding university hard. So this one lad, after he was doing exercise and I finished my exercise, he just came up to me saying like, I know you're a Christian and I'm just finding it hard at university, your community and stuff like that. Like how do you do you have any advice? And so I just kind of talked to him what exactly he was struggling with. And I shared my experience at university. I don't know if we're going to touch on that story.
Yeah, we can do, yeah.
And I basically shared that when I was at university, with my faith, it probably was quite hard. But all I knew was I wanted people to know. If there was one thing I wanted people to know, it was that I was a Christian. And sometimes it wasn't to use the word Christian, it was just to live out your life. I used this kind of conversation of how does someone know they're a Christian? And like, oh, I read the Bible. But like, oh, even non-Christians read the Bible. It's like, oh, but I go to church. Even some non-Christians go to church. So it was all about the detail and the actions, about how could I let these people know that I'm a Christian, including reading the Bible, going to church, but actually in the way that I live my life. So I'd go to university, open up my Bible straight away in the cafeteria. So when my friends would arrive, they'd be like, what are you reading? I'm like, reading the Bible, doing my time alone with God. And so it was very natural. And I said, it's the little things, actually, that could really help you, that you don't need to blurt out, I'm a Christian, everyone, but actually just start small, little things. You could be praying, you could be reading your Bible, but be yourself and be open. That people are actually a lot more accepting than you realize. That's what I realized. I thought people were going to judge me a lot at university, but actually they accepted me as long as I accepted myself that I was a Christian, kind of thing. So
That's great. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Ethan. And maybe, Jesse, just hand it over to you. What does it look like for you in your life at work or with your friends, or how do you sort of think about sharing your faith?
I think a lot of it is just witnessing, like what Emily was alluding to before, about how you live your life or things coming up, church things, and not avoiding them in the conversation. Like I remember when I first started my job at a record label, I'd think home group would come up. I'd say, they'd be like, what did you do last night? I'd be like, oh, had dinner with my friends, and leave it out. And then gradually I stopped leaving out, and then you realise how many conversations it opens up. And I think there's a lot of witness of just being like, this is important to you in your life, or you do things around it. Like today, for example, I've just been at the football. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to leave on time, so I've got to get to church for this. And it just opens up so many conversations. So naturally, like Ethan was saying, it's just about it being part of your life and not hiding that and being proud of that or comfortable with that, so that then that allows other people often to come to you and talk to you about things or want to talk to you about that if there's an interest there already.
And I know, Jesse, like with your job, you were working with some quite sort of high-profile people or well-known people a lot of the time. Like, was that challenging? Did they have sort of hard questions for you, or were they quite receptive? How did you share it in that context?
I have had a few times when people have kind of, as soon as they know you're a Christian, it's straight to the like headline questions about Christianity, like the ones in the news, like what is your opinion on this topic? I have had that, but I think Helping on Alpha's really helped me with that, actually, in terms of being like, I don't have to have all the answers. And sometimes maybe it shows a strength that I don't have all the answers, but I believe this enough that I'm willing to like let it lead my life, even though I haven't learned everything about it yet. But also there's been times like I've worked with artists that are Christian that have asked me that I had a great time once. Actually, we were at a gig and Martin and Emily came with their boys, and so I was like, oh, actually, can I put my vicars on the guest list? They were like, no way, they want to come. I was like, yeah. And then we had a conversation about coming to church and stuff. So there's been some opportunities there, which I think I wouldn't have thought would come up.
Nice. Okay. And Lissa, how about you? I mean, because I know you do a fair amount at work and that sort of thing, but what does it look like for you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what these guys have said about owning it, kind of just owning who you are and kind of not being ashamed or afraid to say who you are and what you believe is also, yeah, sitting there with the Bible, I think that's amazing, but also the confidence in a conversation if people are talking about things that you disagree with, even if you maybe don't have the theology, or if people are talking about worldviews and it goes against what you believe, it's okay to say, actually, I don't agree with that, this is where I'm coming from, and you can have a conversation that doesn't have to become an argument, and it just opens up and they go, oh, well, why do you think that? Why do you think this? And then kind of making it personal, you can start having that conversation, it's relatable. Even just talking with one of my friends who recently started inviting to church, just getting into kind of philosophical discussions, it just piques an interest, and you go, well, what do you want to, this is how it makes me feel on a Sunday, do you want to come? Do you want to see? And then there's that just invitation, which is what I always do. The worst people can usually say is no. And it's the same work-wise. I first got involved with our faith network because during COVID, there was an alpha going online. I got involved, started inviting my colleagues, and then, it's just about kind of knowing, to these guys' points, I may not have all the answers, but I can invite people and we can talk about it. I've learned things from other people. I've learned things from going through these courses myself. And just kind of having those healthy discussions, just owning it.
Sorry, Emily, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you say very easy, we just invite people. What do you say, particularly in the work context, when you know you've got to see them the next day? It's not like someone you've met on the street and you've sort of said, would you like to come and do Alpha? This is what it's about. Or would you like to come to church? Or can I tell you about Jesus? And then you can run away. But these people you know that you're going to see again, how do you invite people to Alpha or talk about your faith quite in that invitational context, in that kind of come and see thing? What sort of thing do you say?
I've experienced, I suppose, I've had some time away from the Lord. I haven't always been close to the Lord in my life, and have, lived quite a non-Christian lifestyle. And I have tried to share my experience with people when I invite them. And sometimes it comes out of, I've actually experienced the change in my life. Would you like to also kind of come and see what changed my life? But also there is an element of just kind of biting the bullet and just kind of going for it. Yeah, you have to see them the next day, and they may have said no, and like that's okay. It's like inviting someone to anything else. You may sort of feel a moment of kind of rejection, a bit of embarrassment, but it's kind of going, okay, on to the next. And also sometimes, even if somebody said no, that doesn't mean it's no to God forever. You've potentially planted a seed and you started an idea. Maybe it's no right then, and maybe you'll never see the fruition of it, but maybe you started something for somebody else to pick up, and God's got a wider plan, and sadly you may never see the result of that, but it's worth a shot.
And actually, Ethan, if just on that point, because I know we were speaking earlier today, and you were sharing a little bit about people are sort of drawn to you if you're passionate around something, and I thought that was really interesting. So would you mind sharing a little bit around that?
Yeah. So I think that started when I first found out about Alpha. That was at university, and my experience with it was I was asked to run it. My first time doing Alpha was running Alpha, and I was like, what is it?
Nice little baptism of fire for you.
I know, genuinely. And I had no idea what was going to happen. Were people going to turn up, or was it just going to be me and my youth pastor kind of thing? But we were faithful and we did it. We hosted it, and I loved the first night. There weren't that many people. There were some, but I would go back to my halls on this high because I had such a great conversation. There was great food. And I was just like, that was so cool. And going into my university halls, you had to go through the common room, and so everyone would see me coming in from like a Wednesday evening. And that would happen every Wednesday. And each time they're like, Ethan, where have you been? I'm like, Alpha, I've been at this thing called Alpha. You got to check it out. And then slowly but surely, they just like said, like, can we come? And so, kind of unconventional, I didn't invite them. They invited themselves. And
That helps.
and thankfully, but surely, by the end of the Alpha course, pretty much my whole student accommodation came. And some of them I, again, haven't even spoken to. They ordered their own taxis and Ubers. Mind you, the church I went to was in Westminster. My hall was in Thursdown, Tooting.
Okay.
So they got their own like transport to go there. I'm like, what? So when I was just amazed. And it was in that moment I knew that it wasn't on me. You know, all I did was I was authentic and I was passionate about what was going on, and I loved the conversations and talking about faith, and I was so passionate about my faith, and I basically said that I think passion is quite infectious, but you can't lie about being passionate about something.
Yeah.
I think people will see right through it. Same with church. If you're not actually enjoying church, people will know.
Yeah.
And so if you want to invite people, you probably should be enjoying it. But also make it a lot harder for yourself, basically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
You know what? I completely agree with that. It's talking about it with enthusiasm, that authentic enthusiasm. Even just earlier this week, our Faith Network, we had for the first time ever a Christian group town hall. And we were doing a bit of a kind of, run through. I said, hang on a minute, guys, this isn't like a business unit update, like monthly review. Like, is anybody smiling here? I was like, well, this is the joy of the Lord. We're sharing good news. Like, let's just remember this isn't like a corporate spiel, even though in a corporate environment. But like, yeah, to your point about like being joyful around the way you talk about it, because I think you can overthink it. And if you're nervous and you're scared, you just sort of like, well, this is what Jesus did. And it doesn't sound very fun at all. But yeah.
I relate to those points. I think one time I asked somebody, a friend of mine, if they wanted to come to Alpha. They knew that I was a Christian, and they said no. And then I asked them another time, and they said no. And I think I maybe asked them 7 times in total, until rather than saying, "Hey, Alpha's starting up again. Would you like to come?" I just said, "Look, how do you feel about the fact that I keep inviting you to Alpha?" And they just said, "Well, actually, I can tell that you're passionate about it. It obviously means something to you. So yeah, I'll come." So I just changed my question from like, rather than would you like to come to Alpha, it's like, how do you feel about that I keep annoying you doing that? Chris, I want to know, you've got a bit of a bird's eye perspective in your role with the Archbishop of Canterbury around witness and evangelism. What do you see in terms of the culture at the moment that we are in, and whether people are generally receptive, or generally should we brace ourselves for a lot of rejection? What do you see right now?
Oh, goodness, we've all experienced this, I guess, haven't we? I think there's a bit of, in 2023 in the UK, I think there's quite a lot of institutional mistrust. So I think there's quite a lot of kind of skepticism about stuff. And so, we get that loads in terms of, Church of England, just lots of, eyebrows, we don't really trust. And there's reasons for that as well. But I guess I come from this saying, listen, St. Augustine said this. He said, you have made our hearts for yourself, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you. And that's not true for just those of us who are here. That's true for every single person. And so every single person we know, our friends, our family, are made in the image of God and are made for a relationship with God. And that's massively encouraging to us, because it means that I'm not on a sell. I'm not trying to get someone to like licorice who just can't. Who likes licorice generally?
I actually do quite like a little bit of
No.
licorice. Not too much, But...
Okay. I'm with you, Chris. I don't like it.
We're made for this. And secondly is, I don't bring God into a situation. God is already at work. God is at work loving people, speaking to people. And actually, one of our tasks as his witnesses, because I'm absolutely with Emily on that, we're not all evangelists, but we're all witnesses, is to be alert to what God is doing. Now, my experience is that the prayer that God always answers is, give me an opportunity to witness to you this week? Always, always. And usually it kind of has then got like this massive arrow on it and a kind of, it's here now. And like Emily was saying, a witness, you just say what you know. So I don't have to have a pitch. I don't need to say, like, because then I think of that, and you know, if we all go, okay, I've got to do this job of an evangelist, and that means while I'm buying cheese at the counter, I've somehow got to get the conversation round to Jesus. And we've all either tried that, and it's just like you get whiplash from it, and the poor person that you've done evangelism to is just left, oh, what was that? But if I'm called to be a witness, and what the Spirit's doing, because the Spirit's at work in all over the place. Well, let's be alert to that. And so I pray, Lord, give me an opportunity this week to witness to someone. There'll be something. There'll be something to say, something to just say something that I've experienced. And I think that means that, like, I witness in a completely different way than everybody else. But it's the Spirit that enables me to do this. So we can all do it. We don't have to go on a massive course or learn all the kind of the facts or that here's the answer to all the questions that people know. Just say what you know. God will give you the words in those situations. But I think we need to take those things. There's a woman at Lambeth. So not everyone who works at Lambeth Palace is a Christian. Okay, and so we do evangelism inside the walls of Lambeth Palace. And Sophie became a Christian last year. She had worked at Kew Gardens, and I prepared her for baptism. And I said, oh, tell me how you became a Christian. She said, there was this guy at work at Kew Gardens who was a Christian, and he was always talking about the Alpha course. And I made it I went home and I said, if he invites me to Alpha, I'm going to go. He never invited her. So she came to work for the Archbishop and went, is someone going? And so we were like going, oh, come to this, come to this, come to this, come to this. She was like, oh, thank goodness someone's invited me. And so that's a real thing, isn't it? There might be people, again, like, what's the Spirit doing? Where are the invitations? And because conversion isn't my job, we can't make anyone Christians. But this is what the Spirit does. And because I can't make anyone Christians, all my task is to witness faithfully to what Jesus is for me, what God does for me, what God says to me in all those kind of things. And so I just need to be faithful in that. And so sometimes, like Emily says, faithfulness is just issuing the invitation again. And that's, in some ways, if you like to use success language, that's success. Mm-hmm. Success isn't just like, woohoo, this person, all their friends always come to Alpha. No, success is just people being invited.
And Jess, maybe just from your perspective, because I know, I mean, just following up on what Chris said there, because you mentioned like a lot of hard questions coming back potentially, and you talked about your response to that and not necessarily feeling pressured to know all of the answers and just being yourself. I mean, what does that look like? Have you got examples where that's happened maybe?
Yeah, that's probably the bit I'm still learning, but I think as well it's just about having like an authenticity about this being part of your life. Like, it's attractive to people that, without it sounding like really surface level, to be like, oh, this person in this way is like me, but they also feel like this about God. And so if someone like that can, then maybe I can. And it's either like a life experience, if someone's had a particular challenge and then you've had the same, but sometimes it's just like that's someone I would hang out with, but they also really believe this, or they spend time doing this, like, why kind of thing. But I think it's just, to Alyssa's point about being honest, like not shying away. Obviously there's a time and a place, but I find that whenever it's been a hard conversation, actually the idea is that I don't want people to feel judged by me at the end. Like, this isn't about me thinking what I think is right and what you think is wrong. It is about being able to have a really respectful conversation. And there's a lot of things that happen in my industry that like that either I don't participate in or would be quite shocking. And I think I've had before someone, very drunk person, fair enough, but be like, oh, don't worry about Jessie, she won't judge you. And I actually felt really happy with that, even though I didn't agree with anything that was happening at the time. I was like, I feel really happy that they don't feel like they can't be around me and that they can talk to me openly about something. And I think that has opened so many doors then to conversations about faith and different things, like bigger conversations that you can then have because you're both coming from a place of respect for each other, rather than it being a conversation at the beginning with someone that you don't have that depth of relationship with.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And Lissa, do you find, because you mentioned that you haven't always been a Christian before, and I think often people find almost a pressure when they're thinking about sharing their faith, that they kind of have to be like this perfect example of a Christian and doing everything right. But in your experience, do you find it, I don't know, do you feel pressure on that front, or are you quite happy to share some of your life before being a Christian? Do you find that helpful? Like, how does that go?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I've even had like a back and forth, brought up a Christian, came away, came back. And actually, I think it's important to know that everybody's story is individual, whether you've been a Christian your whole life. You shouldn't feel ashamed that you can't identify with non-Christians. And if you've had some time as a non-Christian and then become a Christian, that's okay too. Everybody has a different story, and it doesn't have to be some massive story. It can be even just sort of micro changes as something to share and identify with people. But I think it is really important, exactly, not to feel like you have the answers. Actually, it's quite good not to have the answers, because then you don't elevate yourself, to your point, Jessie, because sometimes it can come across like you are judgmental to other people, and actually that is not the case. And people do have this concept about the church and of Christians that they're very holier than thou, and that they think they're better because these are the beliefs. And actually, I think it's great to be able to identify with non-Christians as you're like them, and you're not judging and everything. To answer your question,
It does, yeah, that's great. And I think maybe I don't know, Chris, how do you feel about this? Because a lot of what we're sharing here is it's very authentic, and it's very personal to each person here. But I suppose we heard this morning from some people who were quite sort of, they would go to people and just say, "Can I pray for you?" Or they would share sort of a verse from the Bible and say, I think this is speaking to me at the moment about you. I mean, as someone who works in the church, someone who, I don't know, do you bring more of that when you're sharing your faith with people, or do you feel similarly that it's just about relating to people and sharing your experience? Or?
That's where I think that's the difference, I'd say, between the charism, the gift of the evangelist and the witness. We're all witnesses. Like, whether we like it or not, we're all witnesses. And so that's what I lean on. I think, there'll be evangelists here, and we absolutely need to maximize those gifts, like train and use, and those are the people that can go to people that they've never met before, that kind of stuff. That is a really great, genuine ministry that the church, we need to cherish and we need to release completely. But I think, so my friends, right, I'm old, and I've been praying for these friends of mine, some of my friends. Johnny, I was at university with, and so I've been praying for Johnny for years. And I don't quite know how much he's like, is he moving any closer at all to faith? But my call as his friend and as a witness to Jesus is to keep being his friend, loving him, telling him that I'm praying for him, and take every opportunity to share the difference that my faith makes to him. So I was with him last Saturday night. He's had a terrible summer because he slipped a disc in his back. We've had a terrible summer because our nephew's really ill. And thank you so much for everyone who's praying for him. And so there I am. I've been praying about an opportunity, and it's just me, Johnny, and his partner. And I'm telling them about Jack, and I'm weeping. And I say, we're praying for him, but we don't know. We really hope that God will heal him, but we're praying for him. And in it, we get into a discussion about a kind of, would you pray for me as well? And I said, I've been praying for you. And it was that. Now, I think, how's Johnny going to come to faith? He's going to come to faith like our friends, our family. God calls us. This is the miracle of the work of the Spirit in our lives. He uses people like us. It's our lives, it's our words, it's our love, it's these relationships that the Lord Jesus, the living Lord Jesus, wants to use in order to draw people to himself. And so it's my responsibility then to say to Johnny, okay, and I'm praying for you, and I'm going to keep inviting you. So Because if I give up on that and go, okay, I've tried and tried and tried, I'm just going to give up on that. Who's going to do it? No, I must keep doing that. And because that's the thing about the gospel is people only know about it if they're told. Like, it's not in the fluoride. It's not like this is why it's called news, because it's like people don't just know it. Because people think that God's against them. They think that God doesn't bother about them. They think that God couldn't be, only cares about religious people. No. God is for you. He's done this for you. And I think my experience is God takes us far more joyfully and far more seriously in these relationships than we might think that we're up to. And certainly I don't feel qualified for it at all. But the Spirit is at work, and the Spirit is at work around that table. And as I'm weeping, I'm able to share vulnerably about, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that God is trustworthy. And that's, I thought, in this moment, that's the testimony and the truth that I needed to communicate there and then.
Amazing.
Gosh, it's so good. I think we could go on all night. I just thank you all so much for sharing. Just want to finish really reminded of Galatians 6, which says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. And I love that. In my Bible, it's literally underlined, proper time, will, harvest, opportunity. And that's what we want to pray for, isn't it? That God would give us the opportunity and that we might do good and that he will reap a harvest in our efforts. So guys, thank you so much. Can we thank them for sharing? And Graeme, thank you so much for hosting. And Martin, we're going to hand over to you.